Well, how many are really startups in this room and looking to raise capital? Wow, that's quite a bit. Peng, you got a big audience there to talk to, and Vitaly is a startup himself. He's a serial entrepreneur, as they just introduced. So we've got this panel in which we're really going to understand why is the founder-investor relationship, what should it look like as we go along once the startup has come on board with the investor, and therefore, going forward, what are the best practices that one should adopt as a startup to really have the right relationship going with the investor. To my best understanding as an editor of Entrepreneur, I can tell you the whole, it is really about understanding how to manage this relationship, which is the key to really be able to be a good startup who's able to raise the right funding as they go along and they become big. So I have a fantastic panel here. Peng, we're going to start with you. You know, you probably met lots of startups. So to begin with, how do you really, first of all, close a startup and make sure that you want to invest in it?
Yeah.
Because that's the starting point, really.
Yeah. The number one thing, if you talk to any entrepreneur, any investor that's done any kind of investing over a longer period of time, the only thing that matters when you invest is the founder. Right? So you got to spend enough time to understand this person is not crack under fire, is going to be honest with you, going to be very intellectual about where they're going with the business, is going to execute like, you know, they're going to sleep in the office and all that. So you're looking for a lot of different characters that lead to that magical founder that will take the company up to hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of revenues. In fact, we talk about it very deliberately. Can you see this person running a $100 million top line, right? And we've had 25-year-olds where we go, yep, and we've had 40-year-olds we go, nope. So sure. It's nothing to do with age, it's to do with maturity and thoughtfulness and values. Sure. And
can you give us a sense of what are the three topmost values that you look for in the founder?
Yeah, actually, it's pretty simple. I used to not talk about integrity because that's a given, but these days, you know, you need to say integrity. You need to, in fact, we don't just feel that the person has integrity. We do a lot of due diligence check. So we talk to everyone you've worked with, well, not everyone, but every place you've worked with, and we want to understand that you've treated people right throughout your career.
Sure.
Number two is clarity. Clarity at the highest level, why are you doing this startup? Clarity at the lowest level, how do you know the CAC is going to be low enough, right? So details to philosophy, right? Life philosophy. When you have conversations with someone who's clear about things, it's clear all the way through. Right. And then the third thing we look for is resilience, right? People that will take a hit and keep going, and that's also not so easy. But we tend to be more stubborn as human beings, so that's not as hard.
Sure. So guys, it's integrity, it's clarity, and then it's resilience. Those are the three things pretty much every investor is going to ask out of you once you really get into a relationship with them. Thank you for telling us that, Peng. I'm going to come to you, Vitaly. You've raised fund yourself, and you know what the whole process looks like. It's a marriage. So as a marriage, how do you first get into it? What is it that you look for in an investor? It's not always the other way around, but they are, of course, rightly the people with money. But what is it that you would go and say that, okay, this investor and I am going to gel over a long period of time? How do you go and handpick your investor?
Yeah. So I think that first of all we have to clarify what type of round is that. In the very beginning, you're just looking for money, and you don't care about the quality of that money, because in our case we're doing the hardware, and in hardware startup you have to spend much more money before you see the real result. and there's not so many investors who do believe in your in your success in the beginning. So you know that the model of 3F is really like workable. It works, and then when you're looking for seed money, you have to find any money. Then at the stage A, when you have the proof of concept or for prototype, you are like trying to find the best ones who would help you to raise more money in the future. So we're looking for investors with great connections and reputation. We have actually we started in Russia, and the main team was Russian, and it's really hard to find like Russian investors with great reputation globally, who have great connections in the VC world at least. So when we raised the Series A, we were already choosing among investors who have like opportunities to help us in the next fundraising. And when we raised the Series B, which was for the focused mostly for the productizing and making the product and products looking like more like products. We chose Alibaba because they were the right kind of strategic investor that could help us to reach Chinese market, and that was like more strategic decision. But at the same time, the Series B is not the round. Usually, I'm saying about talking about hardware startups. Usually, it's not the round when you have to attract a real strategic investor, because in the future, if you don't want to grow organically, I mean by getting money from your revenues and grow like in the normal way. Yeah. Then you don't have to limit your market with a strategic investor. So it's better to find like neutral or just financial investor who would have an opportunities like additional market opportunities, but you won't tie it up with any exclusivity rights or exclusivity terms for the investor. So it's always a matter of decision making, and I personally met with more than 500 investors before I found the right ones. So yeah, you have to think.
That's a lot of investors to meet. You're a pro at probably meeting investors along with your own startup. But Peng, I mean, since he's just talked about a number, ideally, a startup should probably at least have meetings with how many investors, let's say typically, or just before they sort of zero down on one investor who should come on board.
So that's a mechanical aspect of finding an investor, which is you need to raise money, etc., terms and conditions, etc. But there's an aspect of finding an investor that's very, very much like dating. So how many dates do you want to go on before you agree to marry someone, right? That's kind of how I think about it.
But in your opinion, typically how many times it takes?
In fact, I just had a conversation with someone who's preparing to raise a Series A. I basically told him a few things. One is, and this is in the realm of how to raise money as opposed to, how your relationship with your investor should be. But it's about 30. You start off with 30, right? And you go meet with all of them, and you tell them, I'm not raising money. I just want to understand your process.
Sure.
What are you looking for? What kind of entrepreneurs? What kind of businesses? Blah, blah, blah. And then you understand the whole process of fundraising with that particular investor. Do that for 30 of them. And some of them will tell you, look, we're not interested in whatever you're doing, right? So you drop them off. You have maybe about 25, 20 of them left. And then you, at some point, you go, I'm raising money, send out an email. And then you go work with them. And your goal as a fundraiser is to get a few term sheets coming in within a week or two of each other. The problem is if you get a term sheet that expires in 2 weeks and then another term sheet, you got a binary decision, yes or no, and then you got another yes or no decision, right? So that's very hard. So what you want is all your options to come in at the same time.
Sure.
I've been an entrepreneur about 18 years, 16 years of my life. So I've done this a lot, right? It's becoming almost like an event, running an event, right, when you fundraise. So that's approximately what you do for early stages. For later stages, these days it's kind of cool to engage an investment banker. If you're raising hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
So from a Series A, ideally one should probably have an investment banker on board.
Say that again.
From Series A, I mean, at what stage do you think the investment banker gets
I would say
involved?
when you're raising hundreds of millions as opposed to tens.
Okay.
You should try and do it yourself if you're raising tens of millions. The thing is, you also got to look at how the investor looks at it. When you're raising 10 million and you have someone that's helping you, it means maybe 500,000 goes to
Him.
Yeah, that person, that
Yeah,
iBanker, and you're going, why are we throwing money away at this point?
Sure. Vitaly, I'm going to ask you this. So you have an investor on board, and now, of course, there's a lot of transparency, there's a lot of clarity that is expected from you. Maybe even your decisions, which was probably all your own up to a certain point, is now going to get questioned. And a why would probably be there in every decision that you take. How do you sort of, and I think, Peng, that startups are very young, so they and as you say, maturity is something that you always look at. How do you tell yourself that this is something that is important rather than being nagging? So how do you sort of, in your own mind, put a clarity in the situation and say that this is a desired part of the whole process?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that it starts from the SHA, from shareholders agreement, in which you have to clarify all how the process and board meetings would look like. Yeah, and usually you have to put yourself like on the place of the investor and take a look from his point of view. Why does he want to have these rights? And of course, he, like investor, like putting his money into your startup, and you're not that experienced. So usually, all the entrepreneurs, they don't have experience of the execution these types of business. So you have to understand that they're trying to help you. In some cases, of course, if you see something like more than like something abnormal, then you have to ask the reason behind that. But in our case, everything was really, really nice. We were discussing all the terms of the shareholder agreement, and now it's like we have only the general terms that are very common for the industry. I would say that we didn't have any problems so far. So it's usually it's like around the decision making about the spendings, like more than $500,000. So you have to have a board meeting and explain why should you buy this tool or machine for the mass manufacturing, for example. Like it's not common for software startups usually, but we're a hardware startup and we have to buy like equipment and spend money for materials. So yeah, but you have to be sure that the investor trusts in your decisions and trusts in you and trusts you, and that is the key. So you have to convince them in the very beginning that you're a professional and you do understand what you do. Like otherwise, why do they invest?
Peng, the heated arguments in the boardroom between the investor and the startup, it's something very well known and it's all splashed over there in the media most of the time. Why does this situation really come?
Why the situation? Sorry.
Why would a situation like this arise? I mean, at the end of the day, you're friends. You know each other.
So when you're working on a startup, a lot of issues you're dealing with do not have absolute visibility into what the right thing to do is. Different people have different historical backgrounds, their lives and experiences. And they evaluate these things that are not possible to evaluate absolutely in different ways. So that's the ideal situation where it's actually an intellectual disagreement, an assessment disagreement about where the company should go, for example, right? So we have a very simple philosophy. We don't just invest in the startup, we invest in the entrepreneur. So ultimately, if it comes to these fuzzy, not logic-based intuition about where the business should go, then even if we have a dissenting opinion, we let the entrepreneur lead. He's the CEO or she's the CEO, the founder, the soul of the company, right? You cannot override that unless you're talking about very logical stuff, right? You know, we've seen some of the stuff in the newspapers where the entrepreneur is just not controlling the company in the right way and he got kicked out, right? Okay. It's going to cost everyone, right?
Yeah, sure. At the end of the day, it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
Happy to take a couple of quick questions from the audience, in case there are any. Can we have some show of hands? Anybody asks a question? We have a question there.
Hi, my name is Alex. You know, in the office hours section, so you have been interviewing different startups, and is there any words of wisdoms, like as a startup, how should we approach you? How should we pitch you or introduce ourselves?
Okay, I guess that's for me.
Yeah.
The startup process, maybe 20 years ago, used to be somewhat random, right? You have an idea and you create a company and you try to build a product, etc. These days, there are lots of methodologies on how you go about creating a startup. The sales learning curve, creating a sales engine, cranking up the business. There are stages of a startup. Please be very aware of all these things, right? If I talk to you about a sales learning curve or a product development cycle, and you look at me with a blank stare, I'm probably not going to invest, right? So there are a lot of, it's like I'm talking to you about profits and losses and you don't understand what I'm saying, right? So you are in a discipline if you're starting a company. The discipline is called entrepreneurship, right? There's a lot of tools you need to bring to bear on this challenge. Be familiar with them, right? That's the number one thing. You are who you are. You can't change that much. One of the very important factors is I'm going to get to know you, right, as an entrepreneur. Assuming the business makes sense and you understand entrepreneurship, I'm going to get to know you. I'm going to spend time with you. And the best thing you can do for yourself at that point is to be very transparent about who you are, right? Don't try to build up layers. If we get sort of wondering about, is that really you, or are you trying to present a front and all that, it doesn't work out for anyone, right? So be very transparent. So know your craft and then be transparent.
Okay, we'll probably be the last question. We've run out of time, so.
Oh, my question is also to Mr. Peng Ong. Sorry. Well, I understand this startup and investor relationship is about startup trying to convince investors that. Have you ever experienced like the opposite side of you? Like you found a really good startup ideas and all the business models, and they had a lot of like investors who wants to invest, so you have to convince them. And if there's that kind of experience, what did you say? What did you say to sell your investment?
Did you have to have experience?
Actually, yes.
Would, right?
Yes, we did that.
And how did the one that convinced you do the job?
Actually, it was in the middle of, actually we were making a deal already, and we saw like a lot of other investors willing to join because they knew that Ali is going to invest. So it was, for them, it was like proof of
value.
Yes, of the value. Yeah, but we, of course, we declined all that because the deal was ongoing, and Alibaba's brand name was the biggest one. So I don't know if you had similar situations.
Yeah. Bottom line is, in the valley especially, but out here also, the top entrepreneurs are few and far between, and usually everyone's chasing after them. The only way to get into deals like that is you've known the entrepreneur for a while, and they want to work with you, right? And this is how Ben and Mark and Andreessen Horowitz win top deals, because entrepreneurs want to work with them. And that's really, in the end, it's about the relationship between the founder and the lead investor. And if that relationship is deep, then you have a chance of winning. Of course, terms matter, but usually as an entrepreneur, I've never put terms, within certain ballparks, I've never put terms over people. It's always people.
Sure. So I guess with the time being out, we're going to end it over here. But the bottom line of this session really is that eventually it's about making the relationship work, and that's really what counts in a startup investor format. And the idea is not to be able to sell yourself, but to intelligently convince the investor that they're going to be in for the long time. The confidence is required on both sides, and it's really up to, the more work has to be done by the startup itself to make sure that the relationship has longevity. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you everyone for your patience.